Hello, my dear friends. You're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 13th of November of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with Kyiv. We got a lot of updates. In the previous video we have already discussed that the Russians have concentrated around 1,000 missiles, and the Ukrainians expect within the next 48 hours the beginning of Russian bombardment of this area. And we also discussed that the Ukrainians are asking the Western countries to provide them F-16s, and as we discussed, the main purpose of these F-16s is not to shut down the Russian aircrafts or to shut down or destroy Russian forces on the ground, because F-16s would be completely destroyed if they reach the combat line, and they will be destroyed by the Russian Su-35 with new missiles that can attack the Ukrainian aircrafts within 400 kilometers. Obviously, the Ukrainians are trying to ask for F-16s to secure at least a small part of Ukraine. And if the Ukrainians get F-16s, obviously they will be able to secure something like this. Maybe plus minus few dozens kilometers to the left, to the west, or to the east, but anyway, as a result of appearance of F-16s on the ground, which probably will be, let's say, redeployed somewhere, maybe even in Poland, who knows, the Ukrainians will be able to secure the western part of Ukraine. And this will allow them to secure not just the western part of Ukraine, but energy facilities. And there are 2 nuclear power plants in this part of Ukraine. But, for example, the Russians today have already started the training flights. Training flights with Tu-22, with Su-95, and Tu-160. So those aircrafts that can carry calibers, that can carry long-range missiles and to attack the Ukraine. So obviously everything is scheduled, and the strikes are going to start in the end of November or in the beginning of December. The Russians want to collapse the Ukraine energy facilities for many reasons. One of the purposes is to reduce the Ukraine logistic possibilities, to shut down Ukraine railways, because the Ukrainians use electricity railways to redeploy forces from one part of the front line to another. And of course this will collapse the Ukrainian movement, the Ukrainian mobility and flexibility. Another purpose of the Russians is to black out Ukraine, and not for one day, not for 2 days, but probably for months, to black out Ukraine for few months. And of course the main reason of that is, of course, to win the war, to complete the special military operation before the elections in Russia and the United States of America. But the most important, another reason, is to probably make a coup in Ukraine, a military coup, or let's say the strikes among the people, and another Maidan that was in 2014. And Zelensky understands everything. He understands that the Western countries don't want to give him money. The Western countries has money. The United States of America has a lot of money, but for some reason, the United States of America doesn't want to work with Zelensky. They want to replace him. They want to start everything from the beginning. They want to make a lot of president elections campaigns in 2024 in Russia, in Ukraine, in the United States of America, and they want to start everything from the white list, but without Zelensky. Zelensky understands this, and he understands that the only person that can replace him is Zaluzhny. Zaluzhny is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, and there was a lot of fights between them, if you remember, during the previous days. And today Zelensky started acting. Today we got a real official information that Ukrainians are planning to dismiss 3 generals that are very close to Zaluzhny. They're not like his right or left hands. They don't have such a position, but Zelensky tried to replace them with his own people. He tries to force Zaluzhny to support Zelensky publicly. The Zelensky are not going to start elections, not because of war. The only reason why Zelensky doesn't want to start elections is because Zaluzhny hasn't supported him publicly, it's in front of camera on the national TV, and he hasn't refused, and he hasn't told Zelensky that he's not going to participate in the elections if the elections are going to be. And this is the main reason why he wants to make this situation. First, Zelensky can win the elections, but if he doesn't have opponents, or something that nobody will vote for. So that's why he needs, first of all, to think what to do with Zaluzhny, obviously. And today we got another player in the game, and I'm talking about Poland. Poland closed the border with Ukraine. Significant number of trucks, significant number of cars are stacked on the border. There are already thousands of trucks stacked, and than dozens of vehicles in this area, and they don't have possibilities to cross the border. Significant number, and this is another player. And I'm not sure that Poland plays for United States of America or for Zalužny. I think that Poland has their own game. And they're also very interested in some military coup or probably in Maidan in Ukraine, because obviously no matter the situation, the Poland still sees some, at least the minimal goal of the Poland is to establish some proxy on the western part of Ukraine, and the best result for the Poland is to capture some territories. Obviously the situation is critical. So for now we see at least few players: Russia with their special military operation, United States of America with their own operation against Russia, Poland, who wants to get some territories, Zalužny, who is possible candidate for the second role, and Zelensky, who doesn't see the future of Ukraine without him. Zelensky, according to Zelensky understanding, Zelensky means Ukraine. There is no Ukraine without Zelensky, obviously. So he tried to solve this situation, and for now he is losing this game, but we'll see what is going to be next, because we know that there are lots of problems in Israeli-Gaza conflict, and maybe that situation can also affect the situation in Ukraine. Now let's move to the situation on the ground, and we continue receiving a lot of updates from Kherson direction. According to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of clashes on Kherson direction, the Ukrainians lost 60 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. The Russians continue bombardments of cities like villages like Ivanovka, Krynki, Tyaginka, those villages and cities that are involved in the operation of establishing Ukrainian foothold on the Russian bank of Dnieper River. Currently, the Russians still haven't managed to force the Ukrainians to step back. In the previous video, if you remember, we discussed the Russian counter-offensive operation or rescue operation, and then that's brought some results. Probably they managed to evacuate wounded and killed soldiers, but yet the Ukrainians haven't been forced to step from this area. Another important thing is that the problem is not just about the bridgehead of the Ukrainian forces in this area. Probably the main problem of this foothold is that the Russians still haven't found a solution how to break the process of supporting of Ukrainian forces here. For example, today the Ukrainians published another video of that process of rotation. The sources are saying that this video was, by the way, geolocated. At least the sources are saying that that event took place exactly in this area. On this video, we see how happy Ukrainians were redeployed from one bank of the river to another one, and they're bringing more and more forces. As you can see, according to this video, the river is covered with fog, and this allows the Ukrainians to send endless number of forces without any problems, without being afraid of being attacked by the Russian FPV drones. And as I understand, hundreds of soldiers during this weather are sending from one bank of the river to another. And the only thing that the Russians can do is to bomb this area, the Ukrainian bank of the river, with FAB 500. But as we see, according to the geolocations we have, all those bombardments still haven't brought the Russians the expected results, because the Ukrainians continue redeployment. We got some updates from Kazatsky, more FAB bombings and so on. And we got another very important video from Kherson direction, and that video took place not along the river, not along the Dnieper River. That event took place in the village by the name of Stepnya, this one. Let's take a look at this video. That was probably the strike of Iskander, and as a result of that strike there was a very heavy explosion and another barrack or something like that was destroyed. I'll just remind you that that was not the first attack in this area. A few months ago, maybe a little bit less than a month ago, there was another strike, and the Russians during the previous strike destroyed the parking place of engineering equipment with pontoon bridges, or equipment for establishing of pontoon bridges. So I don't think that this is like something else. I believe that the Russians attacked this area because they tried to track and to see the positions where the Ukrainians concentrate their pontoon bridges. Obviously the Ukrainians can use fast boats for deploying their forces for a very long time, but without pontoon bridge there are no chances to attack. And the Russians, as I understand, clearly understand that time to create the real foothold with pontoon bridges is about to come, and they need to find this parking, and probably by attacking Stepnoe they just double check the situation. Now let's move to Zaporizhzhia direction, and probably for the first time since for the previous few months, we will talk once again about Petykhatki. Today, the Russian sources reported that the Russians launched an offensive operation in this area, and as a result of attack, they managed to develop their positions for another 500-600 meters on the northwest of the village. So as you can see, according to this map and according to the most of the mappers, you're gonna see this area either in the gray zone or under Ukraine control. But according to the Russian report, the Russians managed to develop this foothold, this bridgehead. For now, I will not change the map, but I'll remind you that just yesterday we got geolocation from this area of Ukrainian FPV drone strikes against the Russian sabotage group that was geolocated correctly, and that event, that bombardment of Ukrainian forces with Russian forces, with FPV drones took place exactly in this area. I'm just trying to say that there are very high chances that the entire village currently is in the gray zone or even under the Russian control. So we will wait for a little bit more to get more geolocations, but this piece of information that the village was recaptured or the Ukrainians were forced to step back looks like true, because currently the Russians have few goals. The first one, of course, is to shut down, to black out Ukraine. The second goal is to, let's say, and to force the Ukrainians to step back from Kherson. But this is something like new goal, something new that we still haven't seen, and something what the Russians are trying to fix as a result of previous failures. One of the most important goals, the Russians are trying to reduce till zero the results of Ukraine's greatest counteroffensive. And the Ukrainians during their counteroffensive managed to establish control over Petykhatki and Lapkovo, managed to capture Rabotin in the fields around the village. The Ukrainians managed to capture few villages on the Vremivka tactical bridgehead, and the Ukrainians managed to get some results in the vicinity of Bakhmut by taking Kyiv and Avdiivka. And now the Russians want to recapture all of these cities and to show the Western countries that there are no reason to support Ukraine, because no matter you send them money, no matter how many money you send them, anyway we're gonna retake everything back. And all these things are correlate and correspond with the situation in the vicinity of Lapkovo and Petykhatki. There are very high chances. Now we are moving to Rabotina area, where the Ukrainians were defeated once again. On this video we see significant number of Ukrainian forces were running away from their edge positions to the north in direction of Rabotina under very heavy artillery fire. The Russians were bombing the Ukrainians with all types of weapons they have. Significant number of infantry were left among these fields as a result, because they were wounded or killed as a result of fire. As you can see, a lot of armored vehicles, Leopards, Bradleys were abandoned in the fields without any even attempts to evacuate these vehicles. So losses, significant losses. Later, after the Ukrainians left this territory, the Russians started clearing this area, and the Russians were bombing the Ukrainians forces. On this video, for example, we can see how the Russians, using artillery forces in a very slow mode, very accurate mode, without being in a hurry anywhere, were bombing and attacking those abandoned vehicles with artillery strikes. And as a result, obviously, of those strikes, all these armored vehicles were destroyed. And either Leopard, Bradley, and many others, and so on, and UPR and so on. So another bad day for the Ukrainians. We understand that the main purpose of the Ukrainians, still they have this as the main purpose, I don't know why, is to develop their foothold on the west-south from Rabotina, to get a little bit more tree lines, something like this. And if the Ukrainians are able to do this, I don't think that they're able, but if the Ukrainians are able to do this, they will be able to create a broad front line area for 4 or 5 kilometers, and of course it will give them more chances to attack Novoprokopovka from the north, and it will give them maybe possibilities to enter the village. I don't think so, but maybe the Ukrainians have other plans about that. The bombardment of this area continues. The Ukrainians still move more and more forces in this Rabotina salient, in this half encirclement, even in this cauldron. I don't know why they're doing this, but they continue doing this, and every single day the Russians publish more and more videos of bombardments, of the results of those strikes, and more of armored vehicles, tanks destroy every single day as a result of these bombardments. Now we are moving to South Donetsk direction. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and we got a lot of updates from this area. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that the Russians launched an offensive operation in direction of Staromayorsk, in direction of the fields between, let's say, Novodonetsk, Urozhaine, that there were very heavy clashes, that the Russians launched artillery preparation as they launch on the 10th of October in the vicinity of Avdiivka. So something big was happened. About those artillery preparations, we got just one video how the Russians were bombing the 3 lines between Novodonetsk and Urozhaine, that some ammo depots were destroyed, probably some abandoned equipment was destroyed, where some maybe some trenches were reduced to ruins. And today the Ukrainian sources, to be more precise, the forces of 58th Motorized Brigade, who was recently redeployed in this area, published a video of another Russian attack. Of course, this video was published by the Ukrainian sources, so obviously this is like a part of propaganda, and we will not see the victory and the results and achievements of the Russians. We're going to see just a significant number of destroyed Russian vehicles and so on. But at least this video shows us the proofs that there was an attack from the Russian side. The Russians were trying to develop their positions along the 3 lines in the fields between Urozhaine and Novodonetsk. On this video, we see how the Russians managed to get the 3 line, managed to land infantry. Probably infantry started their storming process, but at some point something went wrong. The Ukrainians start bombing this area with cluster rounds, with mortars, with all types of weapons they have, of course. And as a result of those clashes, the Russians took a decision to step back, and basically they start withdrawing their positions, and they start moving further back to their main position. So the attack was repelled by the Ukrainians. As I understand, that was something like reconnaissance in force or reconnaissance in combat. And the next days we're going to receive more updates from this area, and the Russians will obviously continue their offensive operation with the purpose to reduce and to reduce the Ukrainian progress till 0. We haven't received almost anything from South Donetsk direction. There was a few Lancet strikes against the Ukrainian artillery positions and so on. So just a regular military routine without something special. The Russian attacks, the Ukrainians discover their artillery positions, and then the Russians are working out with every single position. Nothing special, just a regular military routine. When talking about Ugledar Novomikhailivka, the Ukrainians haven't made even a single attempt to attack. They will continue digging in process, trying to take more positions, trying to prepare themselves before the next waves of attacks. A lot of updates are coming from Avdiivka direction. As you can see, a significant number of icons, and most of them are coming from the northern direction and from the southern direction. Let's begin from the northern one. And the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, according to some sources, managed to get a little bit closer to the chemical plant. They got more positions, maybe few trenches. So as a result of another Russian attempt to attack, they got a little bit closer to chemical plant. This is not the beginning of the storm operation. This is just the maintaining of the gray zone and possibility and attempts to get closer. So to realize and basically to feel on their own bodies, let's say, the fire position, the fire distance of the Ukrainians. The Russians will continue movements to the south by taking trench by trench, another through line by another through line, until the Ukrainians will start counterattacking. So they need to fill the distance. The Russians need to fill the fire distance, and this is exactly what they're doing right now. When talking about Stepovo, we got just one geolocated video of Ukrainian bombardment of Russian position, which confirms the Russian presence in this area. All these fields were under very heavy fire by the Ukrainian soldiers. Maybe that was another attempt to prepare the, let's say, the artillery preparation before another way to attack. But when talking about the common situation, there were no clashes, and at least we haven't received any updates that the Russians managed to bypass another few hundred meters in direction of Berdichi. As I understand, there are very heavy clashes in the village, but without loud updates, a loud piece of news about the progress. The Russians, as we discussed in the previous video, start using for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation FAP 3000 exactly in Avdiivka area, and as I understand, they're planning to use them mainly in the chemical plant because this is the most fortified area, and the Russians understand before, let's say, FAP 3000 preparation, there are no chances, or the chances are very high but with very heavy losses. Most of the updates are coming from the southern direction. We discussed in the previous video that the Russians have already established control over some industrial area as a result of storming operation that took place the previous days and today. But before I start making the video, the Russian sources reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish control over a few more buildings in this area and to get closer to the let's say western edge positions of the Ukrainians in this area. And this is the residential area to the south. And I'll remind you that you might ask why the Russians are so successful exactly on the south, because this is the only area where we see such a big progress from the Russian side, where the Russians are storming industrial area, and we see almost no like barriers and no like say resistance from the Ukrainian forces. I'll tell you. First of all, when starting from some joking and funny episodes, I'll remind you that exactly on this area, almost not a month ago, earlier on the 3rd of November, right before the Russians launched that powerful offensive operation in that industrial area, the Russians published update that they managed to dig a tunnel under Ukrainian positions exactly in this area. This video was made on the 3rd of November, was published on the 3rd of November, and this is the process how the Russians were building the tunnels under the Ukrainian positions, and then we're gonna see the explosion. So I'm not surprised, I will not be surprised if the Russians did manage to create lots of tunnels on the ground, and this is the reason why the Ukrainians have no chances to are not showing any resistance to the Ukrainians, because maybe the Russians have significant number of tunnels, and currently this entire area was already captured, and we just haven't received updates because like due to some lag of time, and maybe the forces haven't returned back from the combat position. So I'm just reminding you that this is the area where the Russians were building tunnels under the Ukrainian positions, and maybe that was the reason why the Russians are so successful. Another reason is obviously the distance. The distance from this, because as you can see, this is the farthest edge Ukrainian positions on the southeast of Avdiivka, and we understand that the only possible area where the Ukrainians can have their artillery forces on Avdiivka direction is probably the area between Zhelanda, Novoselovka Persha, Novopokrovsk, Yevgenivka. So, and furthermore, I would say that even to have artillery systems in this square is also too risky. Maybe the Ukrainians have their artillery systems here, and they're using this artillery system, these artillery regions, let's say, to attack the Russians in Krasnogorovka and Berdichi. And if we calculate the distance, let's say from Novoselovka Persha to the edge position of Ukrainian forces in this industrial area, the distance is more than 21 kilometers. So it's too big. It's too big distance. It's too long, and obviously it's not effective. It's completely not effective. Furthermore, the distance from, let's say, area from Krasnogorovka to the Ukrainian positions Novoselovka is 70 kilometers. So anyway, the Russians have something like artillery superiority, at least when talking about, particularly about that area. Furthermore, the Russians can suppress the Ukrainians and not allow them to support their forces. And basically, the Ukrainian forces who are currently located on the southeastern part of Avdiivka are cut off from the mainland. They are cut off. They don't have artillery support. They have tunnels on the ground. They have crazy Russians who are digging tunnels under their feet. They don't understand what is going on. The only thing they can rely on is just light mortars, forces with infantry light mortars from Avdiivka, and of course it's nothing in comparison with the Russians heavy artillery systems like Malka, like Msta-B, like Msta-S, like different types of artillery forces systems. So no chances. The only thing the Ukrainians have are trenches, but we know that there are a lot of tunnels under the trenches. Furthermore, the Russians continue pressing the Ukrainian forces in direction of in this fortification area Tsarskaya Khota. There is still, as you can see, machine gun Ukrainian position, and this is currently like a neck in the Russian bone. Bone is in Russian neck. They need to penetrate this area. They need to crack this nut, but as you can see, they still haven't managed to do this. And only after, let's say, breaking this machine gun position, the Russians will be able to continue further, because there are a lot of trenches, minefields, and armored vehicles, and the Russian armored vehicles don't have possibilities to bypass. First, the Russians need to clear this territory with infantry, but this machine gun position on the hill is the perfect position from the Ukrainian side to stop the Russian attacks. The Russians try to suppress this area. There are a lot of underground tunnels from the Ukrainian side, and they use the tunnels to support the Ukrainian forces, so currently the Russians have a little bit stuck in this area. Also, we got a lot of updates from Pervomaiska. Also, the Russian sources are saying that there were some clashes on the northern part of Pervomaiska, and there was some progress from the Russian side. The Ukrainians are stepping back, but yet we haven't received any geolocated video that can show us the real Russian progress or Ukrainian progress in this area. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes on the Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 205 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles, and the most important, probably, the Ukrainians lost two bases of operators of FPV drones. The Russians didn't tell where exactly those FPV drone operator bases were destroyed, but this is very important because we understand that currently the FPV drones and the operators can determine the entire situation on this or that front line. When talking about Artyomovsk Bakhmut direction, the Russians launched another artillery preparation all over the combat line from Bogdanovka, Berkhovka water reservoir to Klishchevka, Andreevka. On all these video scenes, we can see heavy Russian bombardment of Ukrainian positions, and this is not the offensive operation, this is just the preparation, but obviously the Russians are going to attack. One more time, based on the logic that the Russians want to reduce the Ukrainian progress of their counteroffensive till zero. The Russians were bombing the Ukrainians on the hill to 105.7. This is the hill. This is the main Ukrainian fortification area. The Russians were bombing the Ukrainians along the tree lines, along the railways with FPV drones, a lot of casualties. And the Russians were bombing the Ukrainians along the southern railways that located between Andreevka and Kurdyumovka. All these attacks is just a part of artillery preparation before a very powerful attack. It's going to be a very tough operation, but the Russians are not going to stop, obviously. And the Russians start bombardments of Bogdanovka. Also as a part of artillery preparation before something more and something bigger. Now we're moving to Lyman direction. We got some updates. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 150 soldiers. The main clashes took place exactly in Kremenaya forest. The Russians continue burning this area, setting this area on fire. They were trying to reduce the Ukrainian fortifications. This is the usage of TOS flamethrower. Obviously, the Ukrainians had significant losses after that attack. But as you can see, most of the attacks that are taking place along the combat line and deep inside of the Ukrainian positions. These strikes took place almost on the let's say along the Seversky Donetsk River. The Ukrainians tried to hide their armored vehicle in the forest, artillery forces, and as a result of Krasnopol strike, that armored vehicle was destroyed. So that's the usage of accurate weapon. Now we're moving to Kupiansk direction, and we got some progress, some updates from Raigorodka. The Ukrainians and the Russian sources reported about the renewals of Russian offensive in this area, and as a result of clashes on the west from Raigorodka-Sergeyevka, the Russians managed to bypass another kilometer. One more time, we haven't received any geolocated confirmations, but as I understand, the Russians were trying to attack in direction of Nadia or to encircle. So the global direction from the source is that the Russians were moving in direction of Barovo. Barovo is very far, but some trenches, some fortifications were taken. And the main goal, of course, is to get Nadia. And it's very difficult to understand is it true or not, but the only thing we can do is to increase the number of updates from the 1st of October, let's say. And if we increase, we see significant number of FPV drone strike from the Ukrainian side. From one side, we see that Ukrainians completely controlled the situation, but from the other side, the number of updates, number of FPV drone strikes tell us that the Russians during the previous 2 months were trying to concentrate significant number of forces, and because of significant number of forces, the Ukrainians have been keeping here a few operators, few FPV drones operators, and we see a lot of strikes, and maybe the Russians by the 13th of November managed to to concentrate and accumulate the critical mass. And now we see that the Russians took a decision to attack. We'll see anyway, sooner or later we're going to receive some updates. And we got one more time updates that the Russians entered the northern streets of Sinkovka. For now, no updates, no geolocated confirmations. I believe that if there is a progress, obviously soon we're going to receive some updates about the situation as well. So we see that the Russians are attacking all over the combat line. In Kherson, the Russians try to reduce the Ukrainian presence in Krynki. In Petykhatki, the Russians try to operate with sabotage and reconnaissance teams. The Russians try to defeat the Ukrainians in Robotyne. On South Donetsk direction, the Russians made an attempt to attack Urozhaina. Avdiivka, we understand. Artyomovsk, Bakhmut, everything is clear. Lyman Forest, a very difficult situation, the static front line, and Raigorodka, and an opening of the new combat line in this area. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.